The hangar of Vance Aeronautics was a cathedral of modern engineering, a vast, echoing space where the air itself hummed with ambition and the faint, sharp scent of aviation fuel and polished metal. Sunlight, harsh and industrial, streamed in through the towering skylights, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars around the facility's centerpiece, the Swiftwind prototype helicopter. It was a beast of intricate machinery and sleek design, its cockpit a complex web of glowing dials, switches and twin control sticks that promised unparalleled flight. Surrounding this mechanical marvel was a small, impeccably dressed crowd hanging onto every word spoken by Elara Vance, the company's CEO. Elara was the undisputed queen of this domain, her voice sharp with authority, her posture radiating a confidence that seemed to make the very lights burn brighter. She moved with the practiced grace of a predator, her expensive heels clicking a decisive rhythm on the pristine concrete floor as she detailed the Swiftwind's revolutionary rotor system to the group of investors, men and women whose expressions flickered between impressed and calculating. For Elara, this was more than a tour, it was a performance, a demonstration of her power and the empire she had built, and every word was carefully chosen to showcase the immense difficulty, the sheer genius required to tame the machine before them. She spoke of gravitational forces, of torque and thrust ratios, of composite materials that defied conventional physics, painting a picture of such complex artistry that it could only be understood by the most elite, the most gifted minds in the world of aviation. The investors nodded, their eyes wide, completely captivated by her presentation and the imposing presence of the helicopter. In the periphery of this scene of high-stakes corporate theater, a figure moved with a completely different rhythm. Leo, the janitor, was a man of quiet consistency, a solitary island of methodical routine in the vast, noisy ocean of the hangar. Dressed in plain, dark blue coveralls that were slightly faded from countless washes, he pushed a wide mop bucket on squeaky wheels, his movements economical and practiced. His focus was on the floor, on the smudges and streaks left by busy engineers and technicians, on the small puddle of condensation from a water cooler. He was a part of the background, a functional piece of the scenery as expected and unnoticed as a fire extinguisher on the wall. His presence was so routine that the investors' eyes slid over him without registering his existence. He was merely part of the environment, the necessary maintenance that kept this temple of innovation shining. He worked his way slowly around the outer edges of the crowd, careful not to intrude, his head mostly down, the soft slosh of water in his bucket a faint counterpoint to Elara's commanding lecture. As Elara reached the climax of her presentation, gesturing flamboyantly towards the Swiftwind's cockpit and declaring that only 3 certified pilots in the entire world currently possessed the skill to even attempt its first flight, Leo's steady progress around the hangar brought him to a point directly beside the helicopter's tail rotor. Perhaps it was the shift in the light or a subtle, almost imperceptible misalignment of a composite panel that only a deeply trained eye would catch, but something made him pause. He stopped mopping. He straightened his back, a slow, quiet motion, and his gaze, usually downcast and neutral, lifted and focused on the aircraft. It wasn't the blank stare of a curious onlooker, it was a sharp, analytical and deeply critical examination. His eyes, a calm and perceptive gray, narrowed slightly, tracing the lines of the fuselage, lingering on the connection points of the rotor assembly, a faint, almost unconscious frown of assessment on his face. He was seeing past the polished exterior and the marketing boasts. He was seeing the machine itself, and his trained instinct was picking up on a minute detail, a potential flaw that had escaped the teams of engineers who had built it. Elara, mid-sentence, caught this movement in her peripheral vision. The sudden stillness from the janitor was an anomaly in her perfectly choreographed show. Her flow was interrupted. Her eyes, sharp and intolerant of any distraction, snapped away from the investors and landed on Leo. The sight of him, a lowly janitor in his workman's coveralls, daring to stop and stare so intently at her multi-million-dollar masterpiece, ignited a spark of pure irritation within her. It felt like a violation, an intrusion of the ordinary into her world of the extraordinary. One of the investors, a man with a loud, boisterous laugh who had been a little too familiar all morning, followed her gaze and chuckled. "Looks like you've got an admirer, Elara," he joked, nudging the person next to him. "Maybe he wants to take it for a spin." The group tittered with polite, condescending amusement, their attention now split between the helicopter and this unexpected sideshow. The joke, the shift in attention was the final straw for Elara. Her pride, already inflated by her performance, now fused with a flash of anger at being upstaged, however minimally, by a member of the cleaning staff. She saw an opportunity to reassert her dominance, to turn this minor irritant into a moment that would reinforce her authority and entertain her guests. A cold, mocking smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. She decided to make him the punchline. With the deliberate, graceful stride of a panther moving in for a playful, cruel strike, she broke away from the investor group and walked the several paces over to where Leo stood. The clicking of her heels echoed in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the hangar. She stopped directly in front of him, looking down at him from her elevated position in her heels, her posture radiating disdain. The air grew thick and silent, save for the distant hum of machinery. All the investors watched, eager smiles on their faces, anticipating a delicious piece of corporate humiliation. The engineers and technicians in the background had stopped their work, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and mild discomfort. Elara's voice, when she finally spoke, was loud and clear, dripping with a sarcasm so thick it was palpable, each word chosen to wound and diminish. "You see something you like down here?" she began, her tone implying he was looking at something on the floor, not the aircraft. She paused for effect, letting the silence amplify her next words. "Perhaps you think you could do a better job than my engineers? That you understand these controls?" She let out a short, derisive laugh that wasn't echoed by the crowd this time. The mood was shifting from amused to tense. She then delivered her coup de grace, the line she believed would cement her superiority and provide a story these investors would tell for weeks. She gestured flippantly with a perfectly manicured hand toward the imposing cockpit. "Tell you what," she said, her voice ringing through the vast space. "It's a simple offer. No need to think too hard. You just go right ahead. Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." The promised roar of laughter came, though from fewer throats than before. It was a forced, nervous laughter from some of the investors. Others looked down, suddenly fascinated by their shoes, uncomfortable with the blatant cruelty of the spectacle. The engineers looked away entirely, ashamed for their colleague. All eyes were on Leo, waiting for his reaction. A stuttered apology, a red-faced retreat, anything that would complete the scene and allow them all to move on. But Leo did none of those things. The intense, analytical look he had given the helicopter was gone, replaced by an expression of profound and unexpected sadness. He didn't look angry or embarrassed. He looked at Elara as if he were seeing something tragic and entirely preventable, a deep disappointment that had nothing to do with himself and everything to do with her character. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment, the weight of his look somehow silencing the remaining snickers. Then, without a single word, without a sound, he simply gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He turned his back on the CEO of the company, on the investors, on the multi-million-dollar prototype. He bent down, his movements still slow and deliberate, gripped the handle of his mop bucket and pushed it forward. The squeak of the wheels seemed deafening in the quiet hangar as he walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Elara stood frozen for a second, thrown off balance by his non-reaction. His quiet dignity had somehow turned her grand humiliation into a petty and awkward moment. Flushing with a mixture of lingering anger and a strange nascent feeling she couldn't identify, she spun on her heel, forced a bright, brittle smile back onto her face and announced, "Well, now that the entertainment is over, let's discuss the avionics suite," effectively dismissing the entire incident as she led the chastened group away, trying and failing to fully recapture her previous commanding aura. A tense and brittle week had passed since the incident in the hangar, a week during which Elara Vance had successfully buried the minor awkwardness of that moment under a mountain of paperwork, strategic meetings and forceful declarations of progress. The image of the janitor's quiet, disappointed face had flickered at the edge of her consciousness a few times, but she had batted it away each time, a trivial irritation unworthy of a CEO's attention. Her focus, her entire being, was laser-locked on the event that would cement her legacy and secure the next round of funding, the first official test flight of the Swiftwind prototype. The hangar had been transformed into a nerve center for this operation. Monitors displayed streams of data, engineers huddled around workstations speaking in the low, urgent tones of technicians on the brink of a great unveiling, and the helicopter itself stood under brilliant lights, polished to a blinding sheen, looking every bit the revolutionary machine it was promised to be. The atmosphere was a potent cocktail of excitement, anxiety, and raw ambition, and at the center of it all was Elara, a conductor poised before her orchestra, waiting for the first note. The lead test pilot, a man named Carl, renowned for his cool demeanor and impeccable record, was already suited up, going over his final pre-flight checklist with a team of flight engineers. Elara watched him, a satisfied smile on her face. This was how things were meant to be: order, expertise, hierarchy. everything in its right place. The first crack in this perfect facade appeared not with a bang but with a whisper. One of the junior engineers, a woman whose face had gone pale, approached the head of flight operations and spoke in a voice too low for Elara to hear. The head of operations frowned, then his own expression tightened. He walked quickly over to Carl the pilot who was just about to don his helmet. A brief, hushed conversation ensued. Elara, sensing a deviation from the schedule, felt her smile tighten. "Is there a problem?" she called out, her voice slicing through the low hum of activity. The head of operations turned to her, his own face a mask of dawning horror. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice strained. "It's Carl. He's not feeling well." As if on cue, the renowned pilot swayed on his feet, his hand going to his forehead. He was visibly sweating, his skin taking on a ghastly gray pallor. "Dizzy?" he mumbled before his knees buckled and two engineers had to lunge forward to catch him and lower him gently to the floor. Panic, cold and immediate, flooded the hangar. The scheduled test flight wasn't just a demonstration. It was a contractual obligation to the investors watching from the viewing gallery above, a hard deadline that could not be missed without catastrophic financial and reputational consequences. Chaos erupted. "Is there a backup pilot?" Elara demanded, her voice rising an octave. The answer was a series of frantic headshakes. The Swiftwind systems were too unique, its controls too bespoke. No one else was certified. No one else had even been trained on the simulator. Calls were made, voices rose in pitch, suggestions were thrown out and just as quickly dismissed as impossible. The clock was ticking down. Elara felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. Her perfect empire, built on precision and control, was crumbling into disarray in a matter of seconds. She pictured the investors upstairs, growing impatient, then suspicious, then finally withdrawing their support. She saw her company's valuation plummeting, her authority evaporating. She was on the verge of issuing a desperate and likely futile command to postpone when a new presence entered the hangar floor. It was Mr. Sterling, the chairman of the board, an older man whose calm, deliberate movements always seemed to slow time itself. He had been observing from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. He took in the scene. The panicked engineers, the ashen-faced pilot being attended to, and Elara, standing rigidly, her composure cracking under the strain. He walked over to her, his footsteps measured. "Elara," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that somehow cut through the noise. A significant setback. Was not a question. She could only nod, her mind racing through disastrous scenarios. "Have you," he continued, his gaze scanning the hangar before settling on her again, "considered asking Leo?" The question was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the high-stakes crisis at hand, that Elara initially thought she had misheard. She stared at Mr. Sterling, her confusion momentarily overriding her panic. "Leo?" she repeated, the name tasting foreign on her tongue. "The janitor? What could he possibly do? Hand out towels?" Her voice was laced with a hysterical edge. Mr. Sterling didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes and said, "The situation requires unconventional solutions. Ask him." It was not a suggestion. It was the calm, unequivocal directive of the man who had ultimately approved her CEO position. Bewildered, humiliated by the absurdity of it, but powerless to refuse the chairman, Elara gestured violently at a nearby engineer. "Find the janitor. Leo. Now." The engineer, looking equally confused, ran off. Minutes later, Leo was located, emerging from a side corridor near the storage closets, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression one of mild curiosity at the summons. He looked exactly as he had a week before, same faded coveralls, same quiet demeanor. He saw the chaos, the prone pilot, the terrified faces and Elara's furious, desperate glare. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, bypassing Elara completely. "Leo," he said, his tone respectful, almost deferential. "We have a situation. The Swiftwind needs to fly. Now." The entire hangar watched this surreal exchange. Leo's eyes flickered from Mr. Sterling's serious face to the helicopter, then to Elara. For a long moment he was silent. The silence was agonizing. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "The portside servo linkage was chattering during the last systems check," he said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying an unexpected authority. "I'll need to verify the pre-flight log and clear it first." The statement was so specific, so technically precise, and so completely accurate that the head of engineering gasped. It was an issue they had indeed noted and deemed minor, a line buried deep in a report. How could a janitor know that? Before anyone could react, Leo was moving. He walked towards the swift wind, and with every step the transformation was breathtaking. The slight slouch in his shoulders vanished, replaced by a posture of innate, commanding grace. The hesitant shuffle became the purposeful stride of someone approaching his birthright. He dropped his cleaning rag on a nearby tool cart without looking. He reached the aircraft, and his hands, which usually gripped a mop handle, now ran over the composite skin of the helicopter's fuselage with a tactile intimacy that spoke of deep, profound knowledge. He wasn't cleaning it, he was communing with it. He tapped panels, listened to the hum of the idle electronics, his eyes missing nothing. He moved to the side and pointed to a nearly invisible seam. This panel is misaligned by 0.5 millimeter. It will create a harmonic vibration at high speed. An engineer rushed over, peered at it, and looked back with stunned confirmation. Elara could only watch, her mouth agape, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The man she had mocked was moving with more authority around her company's flagship project than she ever had. Without a word, Leo then climbed up into the pilot's seat as if he were coming home. His hands, now resting on the controls, seemed to belong there. He began flipping switches with a fluid, unconscious expertise, his eyes scanning the dials and screens, absorbing data faster than any of the engineers monitoring the same streams from their stations. The helicopter, which had seemed like a complex and temperamental beast to everyone else, began to awaken under his touch with a smooth, eager purr. The engines whirred to life, the rotor system beginning its slow, powerful rotation with a seamless grace that it had never before exhibited. Elara found her voice, a strangled protest forming on her lips, but Mr. Sterling placed a gentle but firm hand on her arm. "Wait," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the cockpit, filled with a look of immense pride. "Just watch." What followed was not merely a flight, it was a symphony. Leo lifted the swift wind off the hangar floor with a delicacy that made it seem weightless. He guided it out of the vast open doors and into the sky. Through the hangar doors and on the monitoring screens, everyone watched, utterly transfixed. He didn't just fly the pre-programmed test route. He put the machine through its paces, executing complex maneuvers, tight banks, and precision hovers that the design team had only theorized were possible. He was not fighting the controls. He was conversing with them, demonstrating a mastery that was absolute, artistic, and utterly humbling to every expert in the room. He landed minutes later with a touch so gentle the skids barely whispered against the concrete. The hangar was utterly silent, save for the fading whine of the turbines. The engineers stood in stunned reverence. The crisis was averted, the flight a spectacular success beyond their wildest dreams. But for Elara, the victory felt like a devastating defeat. She had been proven catastrophically, publicly wrong. As Leo powered down the systems and climbed out of the cockpit, his calm demeanor returning, Mr. Sterling finally turned to the speechless CEO. His explanation was quiet, meant for her ears alone, each word a hammer blow to her crumbling ego. Leo, he revealed, was the anonymous ghost designer behind the Swiftwind's most brilliant innovations. He was a legendary test pilot who had retired from the public eye after a personal loss, seeking solace in the simple, meditative rhythm of manual labor. The company kept him on the payroll as a highly paid, secret consultant. His janitorial cover was his choice, a way to remain anonymous and close to the machines he loved without pressure. The man she had offered a marriage proposal as a joke was the genius whose work she had been boasting about, the very soul of the machine she claimed to command. The magnitude of her error was not merely embarrassing, it was a fundamental failure of leadership and perception that left her utterly shattered. The hangar, which moments before had been a roaring cacophony of powerful turbines and crackling radio chatter, fell into a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. The air, thick with the smell of hot engine oil and adrenaline, now seemed to hang heavy with the weight of a shattered reality. All eyes, wide with a mixture of awe, confusion, and dawning understanding, were fixed on the figure of Leo as he descended from the Swiftwind's cockpit. The fluid, authoritative grace that had defined his movements during the flight did not vanish, but it softened, settling back into the more familiar, quiet containment they were used to seeing. He placed a hand on the helicopter's fuselage, giving it a final, almost affectionate pat, as if thanking the machine for its performance, before his gaze swept over the frozen tableau of engineers and technicians. He ignored their stunned stares, his focus seemingly internal, as if processing the unwelcome return to a spotlight he had deliberately left behind. The silence was broken not by a voice, but by the slow, deliberate click of heels on concrete. Every head turned to watch Elara Vance take a step forward, then another. Her journey across the 20 feet of floor that separated her from Leo felt like a miles-long march of penance. The arrogant CEO who had commanded the room less than an hour ago was gone, replaced by a woman whose foundation had been utterly demolished. Her shoulders, usually pulled back in defiant confidence, were slightly slumped. The expensive suit that had been her armor now seemed to hang on her like a costume. Her face, usually a mask of calculated composure, was pale and utterly unguarded, etched with a raw, unvarnished shame that was painful to witness. She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes searching his face, not with demand, but with a desperate need to be seen, to be heard in her remorse. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the sharp, ringing instrument of authority from the tour. It was low, husky, stripped bare of all its former power, trembling with the force of the emotion she was struggling to contain. Leo, his name was not a command but a plea, spoken so softly it was almost a whisper. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue, to form the words that felt so inadequate against the scale of her failure. I stand before you with no excuses. None. She took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of pure humiliation, not for herself, but for the profound wrong she had committed. What I said to you, what I did, it was more than just arrogance. It was cruelty. It was small-minded and vile. I judged you. I measured your worth by a uniform and a job title, and I was completely and utterly blind. Her voice gained a little strength, not from pride, but from the intensity of her conviction. I looked at you and saw someone beneath my notice. I was so proud of this, she gestured weakly at the helicopter, this machine, this achievement. I boasted about the genius behind it without ever for a second recognizing that the genius was standing right in front of me, holding a mop. You have more talent, more skill, in your smallest finger than I possess in my entire being. My apology can't erase what I said. It can't undo the humiliation I inflicted. But I need you to hear it. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. She finished, her breath catching, and she did something then that shocked the entire assembly even more than the flight had. She slightly bowed her head, a gesture of complete and total surrender. Leo listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. He absorbed every word, his own expression unreadable, though the deep sadness that had been there a week ago was now tempered by something else, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took to offer such a naked apology. The silence stretched for a long moment after she finished, everyone waiting for his response. He looked from her, humbled and broken before him, to the faces of the engineers, to Mr. Sterling's calm presence, and finally back to her. The ghost of a smile, not of triumph, but of a weary, ancient understanding, touched his lips. A stubborn stain, he said, his voice that same quiet rumble, yet it carried effortlessly through the silent hangar. He was echoing his own words from her imagined future, but now they held no mystery. Pride is a stubborn stain on the soul. It blinds us to the truth of people. It makes us see reflections of ourselves instead of the reality of others. The floor, he gestured around the vast, clean space, it's easy to clean. You see the dirt, you remove it. It's simple. Cleaning the inside, that's the real work. And it seems you've already started. His words were not an absolution, but they were an acceptance. He saw that her remorse was genuine, that the lesson had been learned at a seismic cost to her ego, and he, in his infinite grace, chose to acknowledge the effort. A palpable wave of relief washed through the onlookers. Elara slowly raised her head, a single tear finally escaping to trace a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, not out of embarrassment but out of a new respect for the moment. Seizing on this fragile bridge of understanding, her business instincts, now realigned toward genuine respect, kicked in. Leo, she said, her voice firmer now, clear and earnest. Your job, your real job. I am offering you the position of head of design. Full autonomy. A salary that reflects your unparalleled value to this company. Everything. It is yours. It always should have been. It was a grand offer, a king's ransom, the kind of offer she knew anyone in the industry would kill for. Leo listened politely, and then, to the astonishment of everyone, he shook his head. A soft, definite refusal. Thank you, Ms. Vance. That is a generous offer. But no. He saw the confusion on her face and explained. A corner office, meetings, managing egos. That is your world. It is a world I consciously left. The pressure, the noise, it drowns out the sound of the engines. It silences the subtle language of the machines. I find my peace in the simplicity of the work. The hum of the hangar at night, the feel of a well-worn tool, the satisfaction of a clean floor, these things keep my mind clear. He was not rejecting her out of spite. He was simply being true to himself, a self she was only now beginning to comprehend. Elara for the first time truly heard him. She understood that his genius was inextricably linked to his peace, and to force him into a corporate box would be to destroy the very thing that made him valuable. She nodded, a new kind of wisdom dawning in her eyes. Then name your terms, she said, her tone one of negotiation, but of a completely new kind, one based on mutual respect. Whatever role you want. However you want to work. Just stay. Help us. Leo considered this. He looked over at the swift wind, then at the young bright-eyed engineers who were watching him as if he were a mythical creature made real. Senior consultant and chief test pilot, he said after a moment. I will review the designs. I will fly the first flights. I will mentor those who want to learn. He then turned his gaze directly to her, and his tone, while still quiet, held an unshakable firmness. But my condition is this: I am treated with the same respect as everyone in this hangar. From the newest intern to the most senior engineer. Do you? No special treatment. No deference. Just the same dignity you would afford any other human being who helps make this company function. The lesson was crystal clear. He didn't want a throne. He wanted a fundamental change in the culture she had built. Elara did not hesitate. Done, she said immediately, her voice strong with conviction. Every single term. You have my word. And in that moment, everyone present knew it was a promise that would be kept. The story could have ended there with the deal struck and the crisis resolved. But it continued in a way that truly signified the change. Leo nodded his acceptance, and then, instead of engaging further with the CEO, he turned and walked towards a group of young engineers who were hovering nearby, their eyes wide with a mixture of hero worship and nervousness. One of them, a woman who couldn't have been more than 25, stammered out a question about the torque on the tail rotor during his final maneuver. Leo listened intently, then began to explain, his voice calm and encouraging, devoid of any condescension. He was one of them again, yet entirely more. Elara did not interrupt. She did not reassert her authority. She simply stood and watched this new, better dynamic begin to take root in her company. She saw the eager faces of her engineers light up under his quiet guidance, and she understood, finally, that true leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice or the most important person in the room. It was about creating an environment where every bit of talent, every ounce of wisdom, whether it wore a designer suit or a janitor's coveralls, could be recognized, valued, and nurtured. She had been given a second chance, not just to save her company, but to become a better leader and a better human being. The price of that lesson had been her pride, and as she watched Leo share his knowledge, she knew it was a price she would gladly pay every single day. If you've ever underestimated someone based on how they look or what they do, this story is a powerful reminder to look deeper. True value often lies hidden in plain sight. 4 more stories that explore the unexpected, that challenge assumptions and reveal the profound lessons in everyday life. Make sure to subscribe. Your next moment of inspiration is just a story away.